Hello and welcome to the 374th episode of the Crate and Crowbar, a podcast about PC gaming. It's the 23rd of June, on the date that we're recording this. I'm Alex Wiltshire, and tonight I am joined by the singular, but the expansive Graham Smith.
Hi. Is expansive a good adjective to apply to a human being? Am I particularly wide?
You just fill a space. You fill the space. If ever I had a room that didn't have enough furnishing in it, I would just think, get Graham round, and he'd bring the room together.
like a rug, just put me in the middle of the floor.
Expansive. That's the word you use for open worlds, isn't it? That's sort of like if you're ever grasping for some sort of adjective to criticize, to critique an open world, you have to go for expansive.
I am covered in mountains you can walk to.
You're covered in mountains that I can, yes. I momentarily got confused by my own analogy. I was thinking, where are the mountains? But then I realised there were the mountains that I accidentally conjured.
Lots of icons and fetch quests.
Yeah.
What's the news today, Alex?
Well, we're in that post E3 lull, so there isn't an awful lot of news, but there is a heartwarming thing that's happening this week. Well, heartwarming for me, and I think for you as well, and for all similarly ancient people of PC gaming, which is that it's Quake's 25th anniversary. There have been a bunch of really cool things going on celebrating the game that's usually put behind Doom in the kind of the whole first-person shooter annals of history. But actually, I don't know, should it be?
Yeah, Doom is definitely the one that it seems to be growing every year at the moment. Like the number of Doom WODs and mods for it, it's just huge. And it's ridiculous that people keep churning stuff out for that. And every time there's an anniversary for Doom, there's like big mapping competitions and that sort of stuff. Yeah, and Quake always feels a little bit forgotten. But for me, Quake is the one I love much more. Because when Doom came out, I was 7 years old, which is just a little bit too young. Whereas when Quake came out, I was 10, 11. And that was just when we got a PC as well. We got a PC in 95.
Yeah. And
so, yeah, like Quake was the first-person shooter that I played a lot of.
Yeah, you were lucky then. You had a computer that could handle it, because our family PC could. Well, it would run, but it really wasn't nice. But so I cut mine on Doom because we got our PC in 1993. So just as it came out. Mm-hmm. And then this sort of, these WODs kind of percolated over whatever the hell network of kind of copying and kind of sort of discs kind of that would happened. I don't even know the vectors by which games came to me back then. I was at sixth form. Just early sixth form, first year of sixth form. And I had most of the big games of the time, like mostly shareware, and I had no idea how. I didn't go anywhere near going online, and no BBSs or something. But there must have been someone who knew me. I don't know how many chains of, degrees of separation it was.
Was it all playground kind of swapping? Was that how you got them?
Yeah, like there'd be a disc that went round, and then you'd sort of. I'd have it for a night and then send it and then copy everything off it, then go to the next person. But I don't know who the originator was. And I'm surprised we were sort of virused up to the eyeballs. My mum's computer, she worked on it, and like subjecting everything to severe risk all the time. But I got to play Doom, so on the weighing it up, it's all good. But yeah, and I feel more. I think that that Doom gets me in the feels a little bit more, but actually I have a lot more fun with Quake these days than I do Doom. And I was actually thinking about why today, because there have been several big map packs released for the anniversary, and I was playing through a few of the maps in them, and there's something just extra. I've talked about it on the pod before because there's some amazing map packs that are going around, you know, from live groups of people who are still making big things in them. You know, a lot of them built on various tools that really extend what Quake was able to do, is natively able to do anyway. And the level of expressivity I just love. Like, it's in the best cases, it's such a beautiful dance between keeping Quake's specific aesthetics, that sort of grim brownness that it has, chunky 3D, angles where they shouldn't be, but somehow they really work. But then actual real expressiveness where, you know, it's just because you're working in 3D, the canvas is so much more flexible than it is with Doom, where you're always kind of pushing it to do things that are already based on incredible, you know, trickery.
I think, like, for me, the reason Quake appeals or is easier to go back to is just, well, it's full 3D, and that means you've got proper mouse look, for example.
Yeah.
Like, going back to Doom, I find it feels old-fashioned, whereas Quake is like, well, no, these are the rules that now every first-person shooter has followed for the last 25 years.
Yeah. And the feel, it just feels so good. Doom feels good as well, like, but Quake feels so good.
It's so fast, like, whizzing through the opening chapter, especially of Quake. Like, I've played through that dozens of times, you know, the first 4 or 5 levels. And they're just a joy to bounce through, blowing things up and blowing things away.
Yeah. Yeah. And the new maps. So I was going to talk about one map in particular, which was made by Robert Yang, a game developer and academic. Robert Yang, I mean, he's really very annoying because he's so smart and he's so talented.
I don't know if I must have talked about this on the podcast back in the day, but like I knew Robert when we were both teenagers. We were both part of the Half-Life mapping scene and hung out in the same IRC rooms, mostly around the Valve Editing Resource Center, which was like the official Valve modding site filled with tutorials and that sort of stuff. And so we worked on mods together, most of which didn't go anywhere. But he was one of the most talented level designers in that scene. And I was an extremely mediocre level designer who never really finished anything, but spent a lot of time noodling around and a lot of time writing reviews of maps for fan sites. That's what I did as a teenager. And eventually at some point I decided, hey, the thing I really care about is the writing. I'm going to focus on that. And Robert was obviously going to focus on level design, and that's what he was really good at, and that's what he was doing. So it was always frustrating some years later when I was working at PC Gamer to discover that Robert was also a better writer than I was. It's not fair. I chose to focus on writing, he chose to focus on level design, and yet he's still fucking smarter and better at writing. Like,
he is appalling, absolutely appalling, because he is a really good writer. Like, I don't know, he balances the art and technology of games so well. Like, he talks about how one informs the other, and you know, his understanding of the technology of games. I don't know. It's precisely what I find fascinating, and have always struggled to actually reflect in the way that I want to in my own writing. Yeah, he's real good. So you will hate the fact that you will hate his level in. So this is that several different map packs have been released around the anniversary for Quake. One of them is called Alkaline, which actually Young Marsh recommended to me the other day, and I haven't played very much of it at all. But it's a quite extensive what do you call it? Sort of re-skinning, loads of new assets and things, sci-fi, big full adventure. So different fonts and guns and enemies have been all tweaked and mucked around with. There are enemies with shields in it. There are enemies with lightsabers. Goodness me. You can see what they're all based on, but if you know quite well. But so there's that. And Marsh highly recommends that. We'll put links to all this in the show notes. There's Q25 Limits, which this is a map pack which is all about observing the original technical limits of Quake. As I mentioned earlier on, most modern map packs ignore that because I don't know what you call it, clients that you play Quake in today that actually run in Windows 10 and whatnot, you've got far more sort of level size and complexity that they can handle rather compared to the original game. But the Q25 Limits pack is limited, and I'm going to try that next. One called Tremors, but then the one I've been playing most is called the Sinister 625 pack, and Robert's level is called Daughter, Drink This Water.
It's a great name.
It is a great name. He admits he's written a really good, obviously a really good blog post about it. Yeah. And he admits that actually it's from a film or something, but he hasn't watched, or knows from a book, and he hasn't read the book. He admits, but he liked the phrase. So the first thing I'm going to explain most of the level. So if you want to play it from fresh, I would not listen to this yet, but I won't explain all of the stuff in it. But it starts out with you in a kind of a dark kind of corridor, and it's got a Handel's Saraband playing. So you're instantly in quite a different Quake feels than you would normally have. And you come out, and the aesthetics, like it's all grey concrete or grey stone. It's very kind of, it's nicely observed. In places, it's quite sort of, there's areas where there's sort of light shining through thin cracks in sort of what look like concrete walls. It's a bit like Tado Ando, some of the architecture by Tado Ando, kind of concrete modernist stuff. But it's fully game, and it's really, really smart. You start off in a very small area with lots of cover and things, and there are enemies all sort of hiding in the cover. And as you're going around, it's quite quick to find some good range of weapons. You get the nail gun quite early on, and you got the shotgun, obviously. You get the grenade launcher quite early on as well. And eventually you find this kind of towery thing, and inside the tower it's sort of open at the back, and with a view hole, and there's a switch, and you push the switch, and then it says the walls have listened, I think it says, and a great chunk of the level just goes down, like it sort of retreats into the ground, expanding the level all of a sudden. And what was some things that were high might now be accessible. Whole new areas are also accessible. And suddenly this area that you're in is no longer small, it is larger. And so you go off and you fight a load of enemies that have now been revealed to you. And you find another one of these towers, and the same thing happens again. The level gets even bigger. And it's so smart. It's really good. There are loads of loopy bits in it because the area is quite constrained, and you learn that first area very soon, immediately. You can perceive and understand the loops that it takes you on, and the fact that you can also access areas from other ways around if you look closely enough. And the enemies in their kind of repose state, their kind of non-alerted state, are direct. They're placed so they're facing the direction that the game is expecting you to come from. So you feel real clever when you're coming around from them from the back, and that's really nice. You also continually reuse parts of the level that because you're still in this connected space. You might be have a bunch of new stuff to go to, but the old stuff is still completely just there. And in fact, some of it might be even more accessible than before, because now walls that were separating it off from the main area have gone down, and now it's all part of the main area. And that changes also its shape, even though it's still familiar. So you feel a really lovely balance of familiarity and just knowing where you are with a place, and also freshness, because you're seeing it in a new light, and it's a place of sort of vague sanctuary from the completely new areas. And the threat level goes up and up and up every time you kind of open up a new area. The amount of enemies that come at you increase. A spaceship appears in the air. You get onto the spaceship, obviously, of course you do, at the end. Something then happens to the spaceship after that point. And it's just, I didn't know Quake could do this stuff, for instance. I didn't know that it could move whole chunks of level in that way.
I wonder if it couldn't, because like you mentioned that, this isn't running in the original Quake engine. Quake has been open sourced, and so everybody's using these sort of
so this
different clients that have lifted
Quake
the limits.
Spasm.
Yeah, and so I wonder if they've also added new entities that allow you to like move geometry and have more reactive environments than used to be possible with what was in the base game.
Yeah, no, for sure, absolutely. I know that sort of in general, like the ports make it very Quake, but more Quake, if you see what I mean, as opposed to different. So I don't know. Actually, maybe it's in his blog post. I haven't read it all yet, but it's clever. And then this is the spoilery bit. So give me a minute. Yang explains in his blog post that actually the whole level, and I knew that it felt vaguely familiar. There was something about it, and I couldn't really place it. It's that the whole area is based on the Hangham High level of Halo, map of Halo, which is sort of, has a hanging spaceship. It has lots of kind of sort of rocks kind of giving you lots of cover and things. And are they rocks? I think sort of concretey kind of sort of tank trappy things. I can't remember. Anyway, it's that level. And it's even taken directly from the data files from Halo, converted into a format that Quake maps can use. And it's like, yep. Not only is it like, a beautifully designed single player, contained rip roaring sort of Quake map, it's also riffing on other people's maps. It's all over the place, and nice one, Yang. Very good.
What a prick.
What a prick.
Yeah, doing good game design that also functions as good game design criticism is like...
it's unfair. It's like it's one or the other, not both.
But I find it like I can easily imagine myself getting sucked into level editing again, because it was really moreish and fun when I used to do it. And there's always something like the point at which level design, because I kept it up for a while and I did it a bit for Half-Life 2 and that sort of stuff. But where it lost me was where maps moved away from being based on geometry you built in the level editor towards these like meshes that you would import, essentially. People would build them in 3D Studio Max or whatever, and then you would import them into the Unreal Engine so you could get way higher fidelity. And it essentially got to a point where it was much harder for a single person to make a level that could sit alongside the professional stuff and believably be the same. And so like these like open source Quake projects are similar for Half-Life, where they take an old engine and renovate it essentially. So it's like, well, it's got the aesthetic of the old games, but without all the nightmare of, trying to optimize your R speeds and not have too many fucking triangles on screen at the same time and all this sort of stuff. Which was 90% of learning how to make a level, was just learning how to make a level that would actually compile and wouldn't run at 3 frames per second once you got it in game and all that sort of stuff. So being able to lift all those restrictions, but still have it fundamentally be quite blocky geometry that you can build as a single person. Oh, that would be fun.
Wouldn't it? You should get into Trench Broom.
It would be fun, but and then it would just like that's what I would do in my evenings, and like 2 years would pass, and it would feel like a waste of time.
It is really nice to see that sort of that these communities, like this really solid and very active community, that's still, you know, that they're pulling around this this anniversary and kind of sort of flowering of stuff. And there's some new people. So friend of the pod and friend of ours anyway, like Brendan Caldwell has released a map as well, which I haven't played, but it's called Big Boy's Birthday Party. And the main picture for it is is it Shambler, the big sort of furry
Yeti looking one.
Yeti guy, yeah, with the electricity.
Yeah, he's a shambler.
He's standing in a very large throne, and he's got a health pack in front of him, which presumably is his cake. So that's nice. So I'll be playing that next. Yeah.
It's really lovely.
Yeah, and I don't know, it's I always like, you know, about restrictions. I've always enjoyed playing, because I haven't had to actually deal with making stuff in this stuff. I've enjoyed playing games that work with those restrictions or reflect those restrictions in some kind of way. I think, you know, and obviously Yang's level, it's obviously doing quite a lot of stuff, and it must have taken a huge amount of work to put together and make us functional, you know, well, it's more than functional, making us fun as it is. But it is still blocky, and the objects and things are very faceted, and it's still Quake, even if it probably breaks, you know, most of its Quake's own rules.
Even back in the day, some of the best maps came out of competitions that would put limits on, you know, how many polygons you could use or how many entities you could use, that sort of stuff. And so, like, I remember there was, I can't remember, was it Polycount was maybe the community that did it, but there was a mapping competition for Quake 3 where you could only use a certain number of brushes in the creation of a multiplayer level, and people created these really interesting sort of abstract geometric spaces using like flat color brushes and stuff like that. And the winner of the competition was by Sparth.
Oh, really?
Who went on to become a mega famous concept artist and is now the lead
NFT enthusiast.
Is he?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So. I think he might have I think his thing might be the record high sale or something like that of art stuff. Anyway.
Well, he's now the lead artist on Halo Infinite.
Right.
So, like, there's just something nice about, I don't know, it feels like full circle. Someone recreating a Halo 1 map in Quake. And the guy that's now doing Halo Infinite used to make Quake maps as well.
You see, I do wonder what happens though, because, you know, there was a whole tranche of gaming that was informed by these sort of high restriction people who'd learned their craft and through these high restrictions, whether they were by necessity or by kind of or by design. I think that you know, I'm thinking about the demo scene as well, and how that informed a lot of the Scandinavian studios. You know, I suppose kind of people like my brain's gone. They done Finnish studio Control recently. You know, anyway. Remedy, you know, straight out of and DICE. Obviously, they were sort of highly involved in demo scene things. And these days, game engineers do all they can to remove restrictions. You know, when you've got kind of Unreal Engine 5 saying, "Hey, you can have an infinite number of meshes. We'll just sort it out through maths or magic or both." Don't know, what does that do to the act of creating? You know, I don't know. Maybe it's good. Maybe thousands of hours of kind of blood, sweat, and tears that could have gone into making fun actual play, you know, was spent on simply trying to make it appear on a screen. I don't know.
I feel like something is definitely lost by the fact that a single person can't make a level anymore. And like you mentioned dice, I think there was a guy who worked on Battlefield 3 and all he did was like water reflections. that was his job, was just to make the water reflections look nice. And so if there was a puddle in the game or a lake or an ocean, then he would be doing stuff to make sure that it looked nice from an art perspective. And like that's, if you're making that game at that fidelity, that's a really important, valuable job. But it's also just 4 years of a person's life making puddles.
Yeah.
And you think, that probably wasn't what that person used to dream about doing. He probably didn't. When they wanted to get into games or get into art, they probably didn't want to be the puddle guy.
But they can look at every puddle and they can say, that's my puddle. I feel total ownership over that puddle.
Running around a multiplayer game of Battlefield 3, yelling at people, guys, look at this puddle. Shot on the head.
You may well have died, but now you can really appreciate from this puddle from this low angle you've just seeing.
Wouldn't it have been better if that person had instead just been like churning out levels, and wouldn't the art form of level design iterate and advance faster and do more interesting things if we weren't fiddling around on the margins of photorealism?
Well, that's it. And I think also, one of the reasons I find playing these modern Quake maps, they are fun and they are inflected with modern level design conventions, but they operate and exist within a much more simple world, and they are no less fun. In fact, they're more focused because they're not trying to fit into an overall designed narrative and characterization and stuff. They pull out everything is stuck. Everything that makes for a good level, especially in something like what Robert Yang has made. Everything is pushed right in front of you and is appreciable. That it's good. But then I'm old, so.
Well, this is the problem. We're both old, and this just becomes the old man podcast. But we are talking about a thing from 25 years ago, so that's unavoidable. They knew what they were getting into when they clicked on this episode.
It's their fault, not ours. But you have been playing new things, haven't you, Graham?
I have. I've been playing demos of new things. Demos are old. Let's get nostalgic about demos now. No, let's not. So it was Steam Next Fest, which is when Steam puts up like 500, 600 demos all at the same time for 6 days or whatever, and says, there you go, play some of this. And it's great. Like there's loads of really interesting, exciting looking things in there. Loads of new things that I'd not heard of before. Lots of things that had just been kind of shown for the first time or the week before during E3 or the, adjacent to E3, like the wholesome game stuff. And that's one of the demos I wanted to talk about. It's called Little Witch in the Woods, which I feel like as a title paints a picture. But this was a game that they showed the trailer for it during the Wholesome Games stream. And it's from a Korean developer, I think. And it's basically Studio Ghibli Stardew Valley is the way to think of it. So like mechanically, it's not necessarily doing anything brand new, but it's just a lovely time. So like you're a little witch, you're on a train going to like you're posting in a town where you've been assigned, much like in the Ghibli film Kiki's Delivery Service, but your train breaks down and leaves without you when it's fixed, and leaving you in a forest, which your little protagonist is very happy about. You've got a talking hat who you're conversing with, and it's like a 2D top-down game where you then start running around the woods. You stumble across a witch's cabin, which seems to be empty, and so you clean it, and there's a basement filled with like machinery. And the game pretty quickly becomes about creating potions to fill out your your potion recipe book, I suppose, which you do by like exploring the woods, picking up flowers, using the book to guide you in the recipes, and then using the tools in the basement of this house in order to craft them. So, go collect 2 of these and 3 of these, and then juice this one and roast this one, and then throw them together in a witch's cauldron, and it will spit out a bomb. And you're going to use that to then blow up some thorny vines which are blocking your path and opening up a new area. It's quite like I can compare it to Stardew because plants and harvesting and crafting and that sort of stuff, but it's quite similar to Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion, which I talked about a couple of months ago on the podcast. And it's a game with like lots of short little mini quests that you complete quite quickly, that are usually about going and retrieving an object and sometimes transmuting that into a different object in order to like remove some block to your progress. But it's really lovely to look at, and it's really charming as well. So like, for example, one of the resources you have to gather, I think it's called like lizard bubbles or something like that. But there's like a 24-hour clock, and at certain times of the day, lizards will crawl out of the pond in this little clearing in the woods and lie on their backs. And what you do is you go up and you rub their tummies, and bubbles come out of their mouth, and they look very, very happy, and you collect the bubbles, and that becomes part of your recipe. And there's other things like that as well, like certain kinds of creatures that will only come out at night, and so you need to go to bed and fast forward the clock in order to be able to go catch certain kinds of butterfly and that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's a really simple thing.
How does
really
it tell
lovely.
you about this stuff? Like, is that something you discovered, the interaction with the lizards and the timing, or was the game explicitly telling you?
That was a thing that I discovered. So, like, you pretty quickly it mentions at the start through a lot of dialogue with the hat and like some signs and stuff like that, and some tutorial messages. It mentions, this creature comes out at night. Oh, you have to catch it by sneaking up on it. Press this button to walk, and then use this button to equip your net, and then that's how you catch it. And you sort of infer from that, if this thing comes out at night, I bet there's other things that only come out during the day. And yeah, there are enough little mini quests that send you across this world that as you walk back and forth, you go, oh, I was here earlier this morning. These things weren't there. Now they are. Now they've popped out. They must come out in the afternoon. And so you start to piece together this kind of information about the world. There is a lot of dialogue. So like there's characters that you discover in the woods that you can go talk to. Some of them are like, I found a little anthropomorphic fox creature. I also found a human adult female. You talk to both of them. They both seem to exist in this world. It's fine. I had to free the fox from a spider's web, and I've carried it back to my house, and now I guess he just lives with me, which is
a bit presumptuous.
And a little bit. But it is, like I say, from a Korean developer, and I would say that the translation is not 100% yet. I mean, it's not out. It's not due to be out until 2022, sometime early next year, I think. So they've got plenty of time to fix that stuff. But yeah, like the opening cutscene really dragged, and there were like spelling errors and that sort of stuff in the English dialogue. But otherwise, it was generally fine, and I quite like the idea of talking to your own hat, but never taking it off your head, so they can never see each other's faces. It's very odd. I feel like if you were going to sit on a train, for example, and talk to your hat, you would take your hat off and put it on the table in front of you.
Yeah. You wouldn't want to just have it talking, but then, maybe it's the equivalent of wearing headphones and talking to people, on the phone sort of thing.
Well, the only thing I could think is maybe the hat feels naked if you take it off your own head. Maybe the hat feels a sense of lack.
How similar does it feel to Stardew Valley? Like, is there much nurtury stuff, farm making, ingredients farming, I suppose you'd call it?
Not from what I played, but I feel like it's going to get there, basically. Like, the witch's cabin that you're in has a front garden, which is kind of overgrown and that sort of stuff, but not with plants that you can pull up. I feel like at some point it's going to get to the point of, like, you're planting your own stuff to grow.
You've made a magical hoe! Oh, oh, oh.
Yeah, and there's certainly, like, a similar feeling to Stardew Valley of renovating the town, because although your train broke down and you didn't get to the town that you were initially aiming for, you do discover that there is a smaller village nearby in the forest, and your early quests are all about clearing a path to reach that town and helping the townspeople from, rescuing them from one curse or another. And, like, the witch's cabin you find is all filled with dust, and so one of your first tasks is to clean it and, like, renovate it and make it nice again, that sort of stuff. So I feel like that's a very Stardew Valley thing, to, not just grow your turnips, but also invest it in improving infrastructure.
To get really into witchy capitalism, yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
To bless the forest with the machinations of industry.
I've said all this, but the Steam Next Fest is actually over now. So people listening to this, I'm sorry, but you can't go play it anymore. It's gone. Steam Next Fest finished yesterday on the 22nd, and so it'll be long gone by the time this episode goes up. The next game I wanted to talk about, however, is both, it just came out yesterday, and the demo is still available, and that's Super Magbot, which is, have you played or seen this before?
No, it doesn't sound familiar, actually.
It's a 2D platformer, but with a twist. That's literally its Steam description. A precise 2D platformer with a twist, which I feel like could be the description of, like, possibly every platformer on Steam. Like, surely that's the cliche. No one's making just platformers without twists anymore. But the twist here is a pretty good one. You can't jump. Instead, what you've got is like a magnet gun in your hand, which you aim at differently colored platforms and press one of two buttons. One causes you to be drawn towards blue platforms and propelled away from red platforms, and the other causes you the opposite of what I just said to happen. And so basically, if you think of it, you're on a single screen 2D level. You've got a red platform on the ground beneath you. You're going to left click while aiming your magnet gun towards it, and that's going to shunt you away from that red magnet, because the left click is how do magnets work? It's the same. It's red. Like, left click is red. Okay. So, like, it's, opposites attract and the same repel. And so it's about attracting, repelling yourself from these different platforms to punch yourself across levels. And then it pretty quickly starts to get difficult. Like, it's difficult enough to remember as you're speeding through a level, do I left click or do I right click, and which in this situation? But then it introduces, for example, vertical platforms which can be smashed through. So, like, you jump onto them and press one of the buttons to, instead of propel yourself away from it, propel yourself through it. And there are also then platforms that will disappear after they've been stepped on for a couple of seconds, and then there is a resource limit in terms of, like, how many times you can fire your magnet gun before you have to land your feet on the ground in order to recharge. Yeah. So, so a lot of this is quite similar to stuff that Celeste does, for example, or like a lot of other platformers. But I find the magnet gun is actually like a pretty good twist, like having to think about not like both what button do I press in what context, and thinking about that very quickly before you perhaps fall onto some spikes or whatever and die. But also you've got to aim the gun. So, like, you're always trying to work out the angle, and because you're jumping by sort of propelling yourself away, you aim the gun in the opposite direction from where you actually want your character to be propelled, if that makes sense. So it has a kind of almost like rocket jumpy sort of feeling to it a lot of the time. To tie it back into Quake, which, as we were talking about earlier.
Is there
But yeah,
therefore kind of like quite a sort of high skill ceiling? Do you think there are stunts you could pull that might not be obvious when you first start playing?
Yeah, again, this is like, there's easy comparisons to Celeste here. So like every level you're doing, you're timed on your performance and given a rating based on how fast you did it. There's also like optional collectibles, which, you might be able to complete a level pretty quickly on your first go, but then there'll be a collectible on the screen that you'll just look at and think, how the fuck do I get that thing? Like, how do I do that jump but not fall into the pit below it? Like, what is the... So it's like incentivizing you to replay levels, essentially, and any level that you play and complete can then be revisited later in order to do it a second time. And it does get hard pretty quickly, like even over the course of a demo, which I don't know, it's maybe like... was quite generous, so maybe 30, 40 levels or something like that.
Oh, wow, okay.
I would say most of them I bashed, like a lot of them you're completing in like 7 seconds. So, it sounds like a lot of levels, but they're all a single screen and you just bash through them pretty fast. But then there were levels within that where I got stuck and I would die 40 times on that one screen, just over and over and over and over and over and over again. And even once you managed to clear the first obstacle, then I'm just dying over and over and over again on the second one, and it's always sending you back to the start of the level. And like, again, they're only a single screen, so it never frustrates me as long as it's pretty much instant to respawn and go again. Then I'm okay with that. The other thing it does, which is similar to Celeste, is that it's got a bunch of difficulty options or accessibility options, so you can add things like mid-level checkpoints. You can raise the resource limit that stops you from being able to fire your magnet gun a certain amount of time. I think you can increase your airtime, maybe, so like you don't fall as quickly and that sort of stuff. So there's loads of different ways that you can turn things on to make the game trivially easy, essentially, if you just want to progress, or to find some sort of happy medium with whatever you like. So it's quite like a nice complete package. It's by a developer called Astral Pixel, who I'm not familiar with. I don't know if they've ever done anything before, but it is published by Team 17, who obviously have done a lot of these games. And it's the wrapping around this is this kind of it's quite 16-bit style. Like, it reminds me of platformers that I used to play on the Amiga, which were probably published by Team 17, to be honest with you, in the 90s. It has that sort of... I don't know if you ever played things like Super Frog or like James Pond, Robocod, and that sort of stuff. Like the kind of you're like a little robot dude landing on an alien planet. I think all the other creatures are like tree people or something, but it's got like cutscenes in between certain chapters and stuff like that. I found all that stuff pretty... obnoxious is the wrong word. I just don't have any nostalgia. Like, I think most of those games were pretty bad. I think like old Nintendo platformers really hold up. I think a lot of the old kind of UK platformers from the Amiga era, the Commodore 64 era, really do not hold up.
I actually played James Pond on Amiga recently, and it's not very good.
Yeah, and like... you didn't expect the stories in those games to be good, and obviously like the physics in them would feel kind of crappy now. Super Magbot feels really nice to play, but by having like characters and writing and world and kind of somewhat art design inspired by those kinds of 16-bit games, it feels like it's just invoking a bunch of stuff that wasn't good the first time around. But it's pretty light touch. It seems, at least from the demo, like you can skip past that stuff. Like, it's not... You get a bit of that in between a chapter, and then a chapter is a set of levels which you're, just pure jumping around and dying, basically. It's not actually within the level challenges themselves, just in between, so it's easily ignored. But yeah, the demo's still available now on Steam. The game just came out yesterday. I don't know what kind of attention a platformer with a twist is going to get these days. Like, bar a handful which seem to break out, it feels like they're probably quite a niche thing. But if you like, I like Like Celeste, obviously, is the example that did break out, despite being very traditional in a lot of ways. But there's not that many games like it. Like I don't think there's that many precision platformers that are actually focused on just difficult, precise, nice feeling propulsion around a 2D level. And so
Super Meat Boy is kind of in that area as well. Also really popular, very breakout.
Yeah, and that's the thing though, but because like Super Meat Boy was released in like 2008, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, like if the touchstones for the genre, there's only like 3 of them to refer to from over the last 10 or more years. And there are lots more of these games being made, but mostly you don't hear about them. They just exist quietly on Steam. This one, I think, is a good example of the form, basically. Like, I don't think it's going to be Celeste popular, but it feels really nice to play and more people should check it out.
That's interesting. It's interesting because I've also been playing a platformer with a twist.
What have you been? What's it called?
It's Niflus's, don't make me say it, Ynglet. Ynglet. Continuing Niflus's grand tradition of very difficult named the games. The Knit series. Would you pronounce? Yeah, it would be Knit. Kyntt.
I thought it was just Net. I thought it was just Net and then Net Stories.
I mean, it could be. That's how yeah, it probably is, isn't it?
Is it? Are they Finnish?
He's Danish, I think.
Danish.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Might be a hard K.
I mean, but then I'm wondering whether I wrote it down wrong because it might be KNY as opposed to KYN. Anyway, I always did actually say knit. Anyway, there's a knit series. Urnog. UURNOG.
Mm-hmm.
That's a. Did you play Urnog?
I didn't play Urnog. Did they do a sequel to that recently, or like a Urnog Unleashed or something like that?
I think there was an expanded version that was released. I think it was re-released with expandedness. It's a really neat game. It's really very ambitious and really, I don't know. I mean, Niflus is an amazing game designer, just a really imaginative, freewheeling kind of a game designer. And Ernog kind of really leans on that. But I did find it so complicated in terms of you're in this area world and there are loads of ways that its spaces interconnect and to explore, to find the stuff that you need to do. I just lost myself completely and I found it quite difficult. But what I did play of it, it was blown away by it. It was a lovely game. It's a game about, I don't know, it's a big platform adventure. And his new game, Ynglet, is also a platformer, but it's not really a platformer. You wouldn't recognize it as a platformer, but it definitely is a platformer. It is gorgeous. It's lovely to play. I love it. I really think it's great. So you look a bit like, did you play any of Genova Chen's Flow game? Do you remember that game, the Flow that he made, where you were kind of like a little fishy, sort of amoeba-y little thing?
Yeah, I played that back in the day.
Yeah, so it's sort of physicsy in that way. You've got these fronds. You look like that. So as you kind of swim around what you think is like a little pool at the very start of the game, you look like that. And you can freely move around sort of enclosed shapes, I suppose you'd call it. Like they're droplets of water. And outside of that enclosure of, let's call it water, you're in an environment where you'll fall. You'll just go downwards, down off the screen, and then you'll die and then instantly restart. But if you launch yourself with adequate speed out of your droplet, you'll make it to an adjoining droplet or a nearby droplet, and you are exploring the levels through these connected series of droplets, I suppose you call them. And they're all drawn with this amazing shader, which looks like felt tip pen, like all the lines are colourful. and a certain thickness, but as you move around, they dynamically shift as with your passage, as if you're in water or as if you're in. It's just really lovely to look at. Same for the map that you choose the levels off, which I'll come back to. But the levels, you move through them as you kind of go from droplet to droplet. The kind of the wall reacts as you sort of leap into it. It's got a lovely sense of inertia as you move around. And as you go along, as the game sort of progresses, you get a dash move. Hold down. I mean, it recommends that you use a game controller, and I totally agree. Don't play this on a keyboard because you need analog 360 degrees of movement. Hold down the X button on a PS4 pad, and you will your dash. You'll freeze in position, or at least your sort of time will slow down enormously. So you're just moving just slightly, and you can then choose a direction. There's a line that shows you which way you're dashing. Let go, and you very quickly zoom in that, and then inertia will continue take you on that parabola, and then hopefully you'll make it into a far off droplet, and kind of you start exploring, and then he starts playing with the levels, and he finds so many things that you can do with this move set. There are some lines that you can go past. There are orange ones and there are blue ones, and the orange ones, they will reflect you. If you dash into them, for as long as you're in the dash state, you will bounce off that line, giving you some extra movement. And your dash will be refilled, so you'll be able to dash again. So you can use them to go further or change your trajectory. Blue lines, as long as you're not in a dash, you will bounce off them. So these ones like a sort of bouncy lines. And so there are bits of the game where you're carefully deciding where you dash and when you don't dash in order to make the best of these lines and to get to places that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to go, to get an extra dash as well, because you also get a dash after bouncing off a blue line. So you can dash towards a blue line, make sure you're not dashing when you get it, bounce off it, and then you can dash again. And, they're sort of physicsy, so that, your trajectory will be affected by their angle. You have a little bit of air control, so you feel able to control these movements. They're quite fast, but it's a beautiful balance of being able to feeling in control, but also feeling out of control. It's really nicely done. There are some droplets which some of them toggle on and off as you dash. Like when you dash and suddenly areas will just toggle off and then dash again. They'll toggle on again. There are some which will disappear forever if you dash more than 2 or 3 times. So that limits the number of dashes you can do. There's lots of little things like that. There are these lines in the level. And the levels are all decorated with little line drawings of flowers and patterns. Some of them kind of burst out of a droplet as you go inside them. Sort of these lights, just colors, and it's just so beautiful. But all of the art direction, the color choices, color palettes are just gorgeous. The background color is one color, but it just works so beautifully with the line like felt tip line drawings that you're kind of playing through. It looks like a scribble on a piece of paper. It's just lovely. But there are these some lines. They look like train tracks, and when you move into the end of one where there's this sort of orangey, sort of yellowy kind of set of sort of hatched lines, you're suddenly kind of taken off on this little sort of journey along a trackway, and then launches. When it ends, you get launched out. So you're being processed through the level, and then the world map starts to make sense because it feels like you're on a train. And the music changes as well. And so it does this sort of like you're on a little train sort of sound effect sort of thing. As a sort of like an aside, which is actually a really significant part of the game. The music is entirely dynamic and is made with Nicholas produced a kind of dynamic music and sound system. I think it actually made it for Ernog, but he's kind of expanded on it, and it's in Ynglet as well. And it is just this lovely electronica soundtrack with beats and just different moods depending on the level. Then it reacts so perfectly to what you're doing. It does not miss a beat in reflecting what you've done, what you're about to do, where part of the level you're in. So if you go forward in the level, it will change. If you then manage to somehow get back to that early bit of level, the music will just instantly just meld back to that earlier state. It's really clever in the way that generative procedural dynamic music often feels a bit sort of rinky-dink or sort of arbitrary, I'd say. This one, it feels like authored tracks which just happen to be reflecting exactly what you're doing all the time. It's really, very, really good. Anyway, I was going to say, these trackways, you realize you're kind of playing in a space. Like, it makes you feel like you're traversing a space, and there are these hidden things to find, collectible bits with these little off on side routes. Sometimes the thing you have to collect in order to finish the level takes you off into a different area or expands on or like gives you an ability to see things that were previously invisible, and now you can find routes that take you elsewhere. And the main sort of level select screen is presented as a map, and each of the levels are called things like Botansk, Have or Have. There's Orstensparken, Assistance, Kierkegaard, Kastrup. These are all districts of Copenhagen, and the map that you're on is a map of Copenhagen, and you're swimming across it on the map screen, on the kind of the level select screen, and it, all these little, is made out of these pen lines I described before, and they're all kind of sort of reacting to you as you move along. And I actually read him saying that partly he wanted to just make it about Copenhagen or make it show Copenhagen, but also he put it in there because he got funding from the Danish the Danish TV and film kind of institute or something like that, and he knew they would like it, and I like it too. I don't know what it says about Copenhagen, but I really love that the level I've just played is a district of Copenhagen, and I was on a little train ride, and it feels like you're playing a bit like the levels are a bit like playing a tube map, and it's a really lovely game, and it's really playful, and it really actually strikes me as it's like Nintendo kind of did a collaboration with Genova Chen, sort of. That detracts from the fact that it's absolutely a nifless game, and it completely is reflective of all of his talent, but it has that air of kind of Nintendo-ness where they play with a small number of fun, interactable things and make a really inventive game out of it. It's that, but with this slice of just expressiveness, that Nintendo probably wouldn't do, because they would make it about Mario and it'd be very, very glossy, and it probably wouldn't have the same element of heart about it. This game is all heart, and it's all playful, and it's beautifully made. I really, really recommend it. It's glorious. Such a good game. Ynglet. Go get it. Oh, it's also mega cheap. I think it's like £6 or £7. No reason not to get it.
£5.79 at the time of recording. Because I looked it up while you were talking about it, and it's got a kind of, obviously you've described it as being like felt tip pens, so it reminds me of Line Rider,
yes.
particularly when your character goes into like the little dual train track lines, and you start getting whizzed around the level like that. It's like Hokum with gravity in a Line Rider world.
Yeah, there are loads of it. It's like, I don't know. I hope, even if it's like, this isn't to kind of detract from Nymphos at all, but like there are so many things that it evokes while remaining completely itself. You sort of look at it and you go, wow, I don't really understand what this game is. And I've been intrigued by it as well for a long time, because Nymphos has been tweeting it since he started development on it. And I did keep wondering, like, how is this? He keeps saying it's like a platformer, but how is it like a platformer? And it definitely is a platformer. Like, it feels, it has that that sort of in the moment sort of moving between things and trying to figure out how to do that and not falling off things. It's all of that that kind of that principle. But yeah, it's very much its own thing. But yeah, there are so many games that have also played with being able to move freely through 2D space. This one, yeah, I think it's my favorite of that bunch.
It looks and it sounds amazing. You've convinced me. You've convinced me to give it a go for sure.
Yeah.
How do you think it's done? Like, because I think I'd maybe seen this game name once in the last month. It came out like 3 weeks ago or something like that.
Yeah, it did.
Do you have a sense of whether anyone has noticed?
I don't think it's done. I think it's done okay. So the Steam page has 111 reviews, and extrapolating from that, I can't remember what the extrapolation rate is. That's probably okay for number. It really deserves to be played by loads more. I think that I'm hoping it'll be a sleeper hit because that price and just its immediacy and just how just good it is. I think it definitely deserves more. So everyone should play it. Everyone should buy it. It's really good.
Tell me the name of the game again. It sounds amazing, but like, how do you spell it?
Will you stop trying to make me say it?
Well, I think you've said it differently every time.
I know,
maybe just spell it.
Maybe I've covered all the bases. I'm going to say it again anyway. Ynglet. Ynglet.
Oh, so if it's YNG, why isn't it Ynglet rather than Ynglet?
It is Ynglet, isn't it? It's totally Ynglet, isn't it? How would a Dane say it? It would be Ynglet.
I don't know. My sister-in-law is Danish, so I should know, but I don't. So I was going to say, shall we do question from questions? But I hear that we cannot.
We don't have any such thing. There are no questions submitted this week, which we feel bereft. We don't know what we're doing. I don't understand. But if you do have any burning questions, do send them to us at questions@crateandcrowbar.com.
Perhaps we've answered all the questions and everyone is content. They have all the knowledge they need to go forward in life.
I mean, I think that I've done over history. I've done a bad. I don't think my contributions to answering all the questions of PC Gamers Gaming has been good. So I don't blame them not having any questions. Is what I'm saying. Okay. Others do a good job, I should say. But
it's your fault. It
is my fault.
That's why
they've
left us. Well, how about I pitch you a video game to fill time instead?
Would you? Oh,
I will.
I do have 50 quid that I just can't wait to get rid of to invest.
See, I was thinking I was going to charge 20 quid for this, but okay, I'll take your 50. So I've been reading a really good book recently called Working Stiff, which is about, it's written by a forensic pathologist, and it's exceedingly gross. That's the first thing to say.
The title of the book is pretty gross as well, in whichever way you want to take it.
It's a set of anecdotes from a woman who is a forensic pathologist, and it's focused specifically on when she started out in the job in New York around 2000. So she worked as a forensic pathologist in New York from 2000 to 2002. And it's filled with interesting anecdotes. And obviously, like, I'm really into, crime novels and crime TV shows. And if you've watched anything since CSI, there's a lot of kind of forensic pathology-ish stuff and a lot of detective fiction on television and in novels now. Yeah. But it's really fascinating to have someone who is just going into great detail about their actual job, both in terms of like physically what they do to a dead body, essentially, but also the specifics of the cases that they've worked on. And essentially, it sounds like a great basis for a detective game, essentially, because like a big problem with detective games is that most detective work, in fiction at least, is based on talking to people. questioning suspects and that sort of stuff, whether in an interrogation setting or something else. And it's really difficult in that situation to know what the player knows. Because the player might have read a piece of dialogue and not realized that the dialogue had important information in it, or they might have read a bit about a dialogue and forgotten the information in it. They might have just clicked past it and skipped it. And so it's like really difficult to have the game state reflect the player's knowledge. And so a lot of the time detective games end up in this position of either they're hand-holding you too much to the solution, or they're relying on you to be smart. And, well, me at least, I'm not smart. Whereas like forensic pathology is like detective science. It makes all the information explicit. It's not, and like sometimes the cases she's talking about, she's provided with a bit of information, like, you know, some witness statements that saw what happened, and like some information from the scene. But by and large, 90% of her work is just with the body and reverse engineering what happened, how they died, and why, essentially, to sort it out into categories. And like that, to me, seems like that would make a good game. And so in my head, it's like a Papers, Please type thing. But instead of with paper documents, you're making a Y incision and snapping off rib cages with garden shears, which is apparently what they do. And like
garden shears.
Yes. A lot of this stuff was like, they don't have like specific tools that they make for forensic pathologists or people who perform autopsies of any kind. Like if you're a doctor, you have specialist tools because it's really important that incisions are done with utmost care because the person's still alive. But not so, it turns out, with the forensic pathologists. And it's I mean, like, reading this book has made me feel uncomfortable about my organs several times. Like, it's that kind of book where you're like, oh, I feel a little bit too aware of my heart right now. But it's utterly fascinating, even in instances like she deals with cases that are homicides and that sort of stuff, and they're interesting. But it's also interesting when it's just a medical mystery that she's solving, and so I feel like there's quite a broad scope as well for different types of mysteries of the body and criminal mysteries as well.
So how would you? So you said it's a bit like Papers, Please. Sort of, are you being presented with the body? Or what are you investigating?
I think you're being presented with the body, and then I think you've got like a set of tools and physicsy interactions that you perform in that body in order to investigate its insides. Like, you could almost think of it as, I mean, I think there's been other Papers, Please style games that have come out which have been about like repairing something, like a conveyor belt, and you have to like perform actions in a certain order to dismantle the thing and work out what's wrong with it and fix it, as your conveyor belt goes through, or that sort of stuff. Or you could also think of it as like, have you played any of the Toca Boca games on iPad? Yeah. Where they have like, a lot of the time they have a kind of like physicsy playfulness where you're like...
So you're envisaging a playful physicsy sternum crack.
Yes, I think you need something to take away just like the utter grossness.
So the thing that popped into my head was Surgeon Simulator.
So that would have been a better point of reference, but I forgot about that game.
But that is kind of comedy. It had to be comedy, so it's not completely gross. I don't know whether you can play the comedy card when you're doing this particular game.
I think you abstract it because it's 2D, and it's like, you could maybe do it like flat color graphics, or something like that. So there's not too much viscera.
So what kind of clues are you trying to find? So give me a picture. So you're, so presumably like you go into effectively a level, and you ultimately the player is going to have to find that they died because they were killed with an ice pick, right? So how are they finding the evidence? Like, are they being shown? Oh, now look at the head, and oh, look, put your little magnifying glass over the wound on the head and you get information.
I think you'd be given two conflicting reports. I think like there would be one, like a detective that says, I think this guy was killed by this other guy using an ice pick, and then you would get the statement from the guy who's being accused saying, no, I didn't do it with an ice pick. Actually, they did it because they slipped and they fell on this object and that went in.
So then you're going to need to look at the kind of like elbow where they would have a scrape mark that betrayed the fact that they fell over or whatever.
You would then have like a papers, please style like manual that says, well, if it's like an ice pick thing, then it would be shaped like this and it would go like that, and like give you kind of oblique information that you would have to translate into what you were actually seeing in front of you. And then, you've got this kind of like abstracted 2D body that you are then pulling apart, essentially in search of evidence of one way or another, so that you can determine which of these two possible outcomes is the correct one. And maybe it asks you some questions to like how you came to that conclusion, essentially, to like, which is like basically a quiz of how much did you pay attention to the body and how much did you pay attention to the manual you were given. It gives you the basic information that you were looking for.
Okay, I will fund this to the tune of £50, but I need a bit extra juice. I think two flavors of juice that I want to be added to this. The first is that I think that you should be doing this in adverse conditions. So on a train where everything's wobbling around, maybe in high winds, for a bit of fun, little physicsy fun. That'd be good, wouldn't it? We're seeing bits of sort of skin flapping around. That'd be great. Hair getting in the wounds. The second thing I'd like is I want the character. I think that you need to have all of the police archetypes kind of messing, just sort of really making themselves known. So you need a kind of hard-bitten one. You need a sort of like a drunken, someone who's either with a terrible hangover or is actually drunk while they come in with their case and they try to explain stuff to you, or someone who just doesn't care because they're about to retire. One that maybe is on the take. All the types of police.
I think that's doable. Like that's a feature in. Because a part of the forensic pathologist role is you're working with the police, and so if you need information about a crime scene in order to make your judgment over the nature of a death, then you're going to be talking to the police. You also have to testify in court, so you're like engaging with these larger systems. And there are anecdotes. Like the book is excellent. You should go read the book because it's just awesome. Absolutely packed with fascinating anecdotes, page after page after page. And like she talks about police officers, for example, where she will have a body, the person's has died via strangulation. It seems for all the world like a murder, but for some reason the crime scene photos haven't been provided alongside the body. Like normally they're delivered at the same time, but she's getting the runaround from the police for some reason, and the police officer that's her contact on this particular case, anytime she presents evidence to him, just says, well, that could have been self-inflicted, And it takes a full month before she finally gets the crime scene photos to discover that the person was like, the crime scene, they were bound to a chair by their legs. And like, it was, as soon as you see the crime scene photos, combined with the information she had that made her think it was already homicide, the crime scene photos make it super obvious this was homicide, but she's been given the runaround for a full month from the police. So you could easily have a case where it's like you've got a police contact that swears that it's not murder. There's some bit of information that you've been given on previous missions that's now being withheld from you, but you've got to work with the body and use what you've learned or refer to the manual or whatever in order to piece together the story of what actually happened.
That could give some really nice texture to levels, where, information that you would normally have at the start of a level, you just don't have. And therefore, there's sort of interesting lacks of information. That'd be really fun.
But I really like as well that it can be not just about murder, because like some of the most interesting stuff in there is just like medical mysteries, and also just the experience of dealing with families that, maybe they don't want to accept the truth. Maybe they don't want to accept that their child was a drug addict, for example, and died of an overdose. And so, or maybe, they just want reassurance that you did your job properly. And so if you don't note a particular physical characteristic in the file, then the family is going to lose confidence in you because you didn't mention the tattoo or the operation they had when they were 10 years old or that sort of stuff. You didn't log that. And so they think that you've done a crappy job, or maybe it wasn't their son that you performed the autopsy on. And so they're allowed to continue living in denial. And so these kind of situations where you're also dealing with the living and the kind of social ramifications around these things.
All right, 50 quid it is then. I'll have it on my desk next month, please.
All right, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I'll knock that together. We'll ship it. The first Crate and Crowbar game.
Yeah. That sounds good, though. Oh, that book sounds awesome.
Working Stiff. I got it from Amazon. You could probably get it from less evil bookstores, but that's where I bought it.
I use bookshop.org now. Let's put a bookshop.org link in the show notes.
All right.
Cool. Well, that was very fun. Thank you, Graham.
You're welcome.
And that's all the time we have this week. You can hang out with us in our community on our Discord channel, which is lovely, with lovely people on it. You can find the address for that on our website at crateandcrowbar.com. If you have a question for a future episode, you can send it to us at questions at crateandcrowbar.com. Or you can tweet at us.
This is why we're not receiving any questions.
Yeah,
it's because they keep mishearing the email address. They're all going to questions at Crate and Crowbar.
We'll have to look at that. Yes, they're all sitting there. Or you can tweet at us at Crate and Crowbar on Twitter. You can listen to our shows and view various spin-off episodes and things and programs on our YouTube account. The Crate and Crowbar is kindly funded by our Patreon backers. If you'd like to know about more about supporting our podcast and its spin-offs, visit patreon.com/Crate and Crowbar. And that's all the things. I've been Alex Wiltshire.
And I've been Graham Smith.
Thanks
for listening, everybody.